is having to stop at the stop sign because of pickups coming down.
All right, I think we are live. Are we live? Oh, this is wonderfully exciting. Well, I want to, first of all, thank all of you here in Onawa for coming. This is a wonderful turnout, and we're in the wonderful new library in Onawa. We just heard from the mayor of Onawa, who is a great booster on behalf of the town. The reason I'm here is because of the wonderful invitation and willingness of Jody. I want to make sure I got Jody's last name, Ewing, and Dennis Ryan, who originally were going to organize it in their house, and the turnout was a little too big. So we decided to move it to this terrific library. We are having, the reason I'm really excited about this today is that we're actually having house parties like this in all 99 counties in Iowa right now, as we speak. And we are having 5,000 house parties right now as we speak all across the country in all 50 states. So we're actually, this telecast is going out live all across the country. My wife, Michelle, hey, sweetie. I don't know which camera to look at, but you're out there somewhere. She's in Des Moines as we speak. My colleague, the great senior senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, is in Davenport at a house party. So, Dick, thank you. My sister, Maya, is somewhere in Hawaii as we speak. Somewhere in Honolulu with Conrad and my niece, Suhela. Hey, guys, it's wonderful to see all of you. And this, I think, is the expression of what I hope this campaign ends up being about. Because, as I've said from the outset of this campaign, from the day that I announced in front of the old state capitol in Springfield, Illinois, I really believe that change happens when millions of voices, like yours, Hazel, come together and say that we want to create a better America. All of us know what the challenges are. We know we've got a healthcare system that's broken. We've got an education system that isn't training our children to compete in the international economy. We've got a lack of an energy policy, and as a consequence, we're dependent on foreign oil that makes us vulnerable, both in terms of our security and our economy. We've got a war that I think should have never been authorized and should have been never waged. But most of all, we've got a politics in which the people are divided from their government. You know, we've got a pervasive cynicism around the country where we just don't feel like we can really make much of a difference, that politics is a matter of special interests and well-heeled lobbyists who are writing the drug bill and the energy bill and telling us what's possible instead of politics coming up from the grassroots. And because maybe I was a community organizer working with churches when I first came to Chicago trying to do something about the steel plants that had closed and had laid off thousands of people, or maybe it's because of my background as a civil rights attorney and as a law professor, or the work that I did in the state legislature to provide health insurance for kids who didn't have it or to reform the death penalty system that was broken. At every stage in my career, I've always had this confidence that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're given a chance, and that the best answers are ones that aren't just developed in some ivory tower somewhere or in the corridors of power in Washington, but based on people giving voice to their hopes and dreams and communicating that to our government and the government being responsive. So it's the reason that I love doing town hall meetings and I love doing house parties, and we want to organize our campaign around the idea that everybody here is going to have an investment in the campaign, and that all of you have the possibility to influence what we talk about, how we're organizing ourselves, not just here in Iowa, but all across the country. I really think that if everybody here feels invested and is paying attention, this time out, in an election that I think is going to be historic, then not only can we win an election, but we can also transform the country in the process. So I hope you're ready to be a part of it. Do you guys want me to sit? Is this the chair that you want? I'm going to sit down, and basically what I want to do at this point is just open it up for your questions, your comments, your concerns. Nothing's off limits. Of course, we don't have one of those beeper things, so try to keep your language clean, Madam Mayor. All right. And we have a 15-second delay, but we shouldn't have to use it. And really what I want to do is just have a conversation and answer questions, but also hear from you, hear your stories, hear what you're concerned about, and hopefully have the opportunity for me to learn and not just lay out a bunch of talking points. So, all right? Okay. Anybody want to go first? Yes. Okay, Madam Mayor, since she is the mayor. I am going to actually stand. If I sit, I can't see everybody, so I'm just going to rotate around. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm 4 years from Medicare.
Yeah.
And my insurance bill is eating me alive. That is my major concern at the national level, other than the war.
So let me just be clear. Keep the mic for a second. You don't yet qualify for Medicare.
No.
The insurance that you have currently, this is your health insurance.
Yes.
Is a carryover from your previous job, or is it provided through your current job as mayor?
Well, my husband and I are self-employed, so we have to provide our own independent health insurance.
Okay.
And it has gone up since 2001. It has more than doubled. And at the same time, the coverage has gone down, the deductibles have gone up, and the premiums have more than doubled. Okay. And it's, you hear of all these wonderful tests. They want you to go and have this exam done when you're 50 and that exam done when you're 55 and all of this. I would gladly go, but I can't afford it.
Mm-hmm. Because the co-payments, deductibles, premiums
exactly
are all going up so high. Okay.
Exactly.
Terrific. Well, look, I mean, your circumstance isn't unique, obviously, because over the 6 years of the Bush administration, average family premiums have gone up 87%. 87% over the last 6 years. And so your experience pretty much tracks the country as a whole. And the question then becomes, what do we do particularly for people in your position who are either self-employed, small business owners, or are working full-time and don't even have health insurance on the job? Now, some of you I saw were carrying my book, The Audacity of Hope. I actually wrote about some principles that we should follow in moving in the direction of universal health care. And what I've said is that I am committed to making sure that we have universal health care in this country by the end of my first term as president, within 6 years. Here are the components that I think we've got to, that are going to have to be a part of that reform process. Currently, we spend $2 trillion already on health care in this country. The problem is we spend it poorly. We spend more money than any nation on earth, but we have some of the worst outcomes in some cases, or no better in other areas of health care. So we've got to use our current spending more wisely. We've got to put more money into prevention. You just mentioned tests that you can't afford. Every insurance plan should be structured to encourage you to get the tests that you need so that diseases can be caught early and treated properly. That is something that would save us money across the board. We have to put more money into, put more attention into chronic care management. Diseases like diabetes, if they're managed properly, actually can be handled and people can live with them. But if they're left to fester, can result in a leg amputation that costs $30,000. And so putting money into a caseworker, for example, who's working with people to make sure that they're taking the proper medications on a weekly or a monthly basis, more than pays for itself. Medical technology is another area where we've got to initiate significant reform. The healthcare system is the only area where we still put huge amounts of time into paperwork. I mean, if you think about banks, they're all automated. almost every other business is entirely automated, and yet we've got a system when it comes to health care where you're filling forms out in triplicate. And not only is that expensive and creates a lot of bureaucracy, but it also ends up creating a lot of medical errors because the doctor can't read or the nurse can't read the prescription that the doctor's filled out, or the pharmacist can't read the prescription that the doctor's filled out. If we put more money up front into those areas, we can take those savings and we can apply them to make sure that every American has access to health care. Now, there's one other element to it that's particularly important for people like you, Madam Mayor, and that is if you're self-employed or you're part of a small business, you've got to be able to buy into a bigger pool to reduce your costs. And right now, it's very hard for self-employed individuals to buy into any kind of pool. I, as part of the federal government, have a federal health care system. Dick Durbin, who's at one of the House parties in Davenport, does as well. And we end up having a choice of plans. If I'm young and don't expect to have a lot of health problems, I can just get catastrophic coverage and reduce my costs even lower. If I'm older, I can get, or I've got children, I can have a more expensive plan. But the point is that my plan is going to be relatively cheap because of the bargaining power of the federal government. We've got to make sure that you have access to that same kind of pool. It could be the federal system. Massachusetts and California are setting up their own state pools. That's another option, but that's going to be the direction that we move in. If you combine lowering costs with giving people access to large pools, then we can start making insurance affordable for you and provide it for people who don't already have it. All right?
Where do the insurance companies come into this?
Well, the insurance companies have to come in because they, right now, don't really, they are able to charge whatever they want because the consumers of health care don't have much leverage over them. So as a consequence, the federal government, in its health care plan, is able to negotiate a much better deal with the insurance companies, and they've got to lower their premiums, lower their deductibles and co-payments. If they don't, then the federal government can say, you know what, we're not going to do business with you, we're going to do business with somebody else. It's the same reason, by the way, that when we structured the Medicare drug plan, we should have allowed Medicare to negotiate with the drug companies on behalf of seniors, because it would have given them more leverage, and we would have seen more savings, and that's why you wouldn't have had that donut hole that I know some people have been dealing with, where, you know, after the first few $1,000s of prescription drug payments, now suddenly you're still paying your monthly premium, but you actually aren't getting any coverage for it. So part of what we want to do is empower consumers as a block, as a group, to be able to negotiate more effectively with insurance companies and to be able to negotiate more effectively with drug companies. One other area where we can achieve significant savings is to say to insurance companies that you cannot discriminate among your customers. It's hard for a small business or somebody who's self-employed to have any leverage, and so what happens is if one employee gets sick in a shop of maybe 10 employees, everybody's premiums go sky high. On the other hand, if you're GM and you've got thousands of employees, the risk is spread more broadly. The insurance companies are less able to jack up everybody's premiums as a consequence of 1 or 2 or 3 people having a particular illness or having a pre-existing condition. So we're going to have to do something about making sure that insurance companies aren't taking advantage of the weak consumer power that exists currently. What else are on people's minds? Yes, sir.
A follow-up on this subject. The insurance in between, like from 55 to 65, before you get on Medicare. I run into all kinds of people that are working because they can't afford to retire.
Right.
So once you retire, that eliminates a lot of jobs for the young people to take. And I'm not against anybody retiring. I think there's a lot of people that would if they could have health care.
Right.
the thing is, you talk about all these things, and I know President Bush is up there, and he's doing it his way. But his way is he's just going to do what he wants, and he gets things done his way. I don't like his way. But what's your plan to get these things done?
Well, the plan is first getting myself elected as president. That's plan number one. Plan number two, though, is it's not enough just to elect me as president. What we're also going to have to do is elect a Congress that wants to work with the president to get these things done. One of the things that we don't generally talk enough about is the fact that in the United States Senate, a majority isn't enough. You also have to have 60 votes to get any bill passed through the Senate. So we've got to get, right now we've got 51, which means we can stop the president from doing some bad things, but we can't move affirmatively to get good things done. We need, I believe, more Democrats in the Senate or Republicans who are also interested in solving this problem. Because I'm happy to work in a bipartisan basis, but we have to acknowledge this is a priority for all Americans. The health care system is unsustainable. And one of the things that I think we have an opportunity this time that we didn't have in 1994, the last time this was tried, was in 1994, a lot of businesses felt like, you know what, this isn't a problem for us. And so they sided with the insurance companies and the drug companies to block reform. What's happened is that now even the largest businesses are starting to realize that they're being rendered uncompetitive because they're having to deal with companies from other countries where health care is covered by the government. And so, for example, GM, when it's competing with Toyota, Toyota's costs are generally about $250 per car. GM's costs are about $1,500 in health care costs per car. So right off the bat, they're at a competitive disadvantage. What that means is we may be able to get business, labor, and consumers all working together around this issue. But one last thing I've got to say about this. Change does not happen unless the American people demand that it happens. So there's got to be an effort on the part of communities like Onawa to say to their elected representatives or anybody who wants their vote, this is going to be a priority, we're going to hold you accountable. And it's got to be at the forefront of every political debate. That's how politicians ultimately respond, because they're hearing from their constituents. And we haven't built an organized movement around this issue of making sure that health care is affordable and accessible to all people. Yes, sir. And introduce yourself, by the way, before we have a chance.
I'm John Doerr, a native Chicagoan.
Good to see you. Where are you from, John?
The south side of Chicago.
You a White Sox fan? Or?
Onawa now.
All right.
All of our politicians, especially those running for office, talk about the deficit and reducing it. But very few talk about the debt. And most of us in this room are old enough to remember when we didn't have a debt. The stock market is at an all-time high. We're a wealthy country. Why can't we do something about eliminating the debt, not just reducing the yearly deficit?
I think it's a terrific question. Just for those who haven't been following the issue as closely, let me just describe the distinction between the deficit and the debt. The deficit is our annual shortfall. And I'll be honest with you. Are you razzing at me? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. This is something you've got to worry about, because we're loading you up with a bunch of debt. So the annual shortfall, our deficit, is subject, honestly, to a lot of manipulation. It depends on the smoke and mirrors of how you set up the budget. Right now, for example, we are borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund, and that reduces our what looks to be our deficit, when in fact, if we weren't taking that money out from the Social Security Trust Fund that's going to have to be paid back, our annual deficits would be much more significant. But as you point out, we should be less concerned with our year-to-year deficit than we are the structural deficit that is resulting in this enormous debt. Our debt now has gone from about $2 trillion when George Bush was in office to about $9 trillion by the time it's all over. I mean, it has gone sky high, partly because of the war in Iraq, partly because of 9/11 and the recovery efforts there, but primarily because we initiated an enormous tax cut for some of the wealthiest Americans at the same time as the baby boom generation is going to be making more demands on the system through Social Security and Medicare. So you've got about a 6% structural gap between the amount of money coming in and the amount of money going out. And it's getting added, it's increasing each and every year. If we don't do anything about it, then the interest on the national debt, the entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, will gobble up basically the entire federal budget. Everything. We will not have any money for student grants and student loans to go to college. We won't have any money for the national parks. We won't have any money for NASA. We won't have any money for environmental protection. We won't have any money for the education department. All we'll be doing is paying interest on the national debt and processing entitlement checks. So what are we going to do about it? We don't have any easy solutions on this. Anybody who tells you that there are some quick gimmicks to fix it is lying to you. What we can do is, number one, institute PAYGO. And the Democratic Congress has put this in place. What does PAYGO mean? It's very simple. It says if you're going to cut taxes, you've got to find offsetting spending cuts. If you're going to raise spending, you've got to find a way of paying for it. So it basically says each year under PAYGO from here on out, we want you to spend within your means. And that way we're at least stopping, we're no longer digging the hole. Now, we're still going to have to then figure out what do we do with the existing debt if we're not still digging the hole, and we're still seeing these Medicare payments and Medicaid payments escalating. That's one of the reasons why we're going to have to reform health care. It's not just that we've got to help families who are being bankrupted by the current system. It's also that about 50% of our overall health care spending goes through the government in the form of Medicare, Medicaid, and other VA programs and so forth. And if we don't create a more efficient system through some of the things I talked about earlier, prevention, medical technology, chronic care management, and so on, then Medicare spending is going to go through the roof. And we won't be able to reverse the debt. One other thing that I think would be important for us where we could make enormous progress on the debt would be if we started thinking about energy efficiency and how we spend our money on fossil fuels. We could probably save a lot of money and generate jobs and opportunity here in the United States if we weren't shipping out $800 million a day to the Middle East and some of the most hostile nations on earth for foreign oil. And a lot of the national debt that we're accumulating with other countries is as a consequence of our spending more than we can afford on energy imports. That's something that we could actually do by investing here at home. Okay? Yes, sir. Introduce yourself, please.
And from Onawa.
Yeah.
But my concern, I guess, is with the middle class.
Right.
And what seems to be the decline, at least the present administration's tax policy and incentive that they have, where the seems like the wealthy rich are gaining, and it seems like the decline in the middle class is increasing to where the separation in the country today is, wealthy versus poor. Right. And as president, I guess, what would you do to reverse this process? Because it seems like in this decline, the middle class is always the one called to arms, where they're always the one called to pay the taxes, to carry the country, so to speak, and just wondering what you would do to reverse this.
Before I answer your question, I'm just curious. Do people here share this sense that I do and that, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Greg Collette.
Craig? Share this feeling that somehow you're seeing a lot more division between the very wealthy and everybody else. Is that it's interesting. I'm not that old. I'm 45, and I remember when I was growing up, though, that most people had a decent house, but they didn't have some huge mansion. Most people had one car. They didn't have three. Everybody in the neighborhood, typically, whether it was a teacher, a bus driver, or a police officer, everybody's lifestyle was more or less similar. And you do get this sense, just within my lifetime, that there have been these huge shifts in terms of the relative prosperity of people in America. And in fact, it's borne out by the statistics. There was a report last week that showed that income inequality in this country is higher than it has been since 1928, right? Since before the Great Depression, since the Gilded Age. It turns out that last year, personal income went up by 9% total, but that almost all those gains were among the top 1%. In fact, the bottom 90%, their incomes fell slightly last year. I mean, you think about that. You got the top 10% of the country, incomes went up 9%, and the other 90% of the people, right, saw their incomes fall. So obviously you've got some trends that have to be reversed. And I would make a couple of suggestions in terms of where we need to make some changes. Because of the global economy and the global marketplace, we're going to have to become more competitive as a country. But we've got to make sure that everybody can compete, not just some people can compete. And what that means is we've got to put a lot more money into education than we've been putting in. Every child has to have the kind of education that allows them to compete against engineers and scientists in China and in Bangalore, because you're not just competing against folks in Iowa or Missouri now, you're competing worldwide. So we've got to invest in human capital. What we're going to have to do also is to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure in this country so that every part of the community, all throughout the country, have access to the digital economy. I mean, we don't have broadband lines in huge portions of rural America, for example. South Korea has better broadband lines than we do. We rank like 16th in the world. Now, in an economy that's driven by the internet and technology, that doesn't make any sense. But then I think we've also got to have some policies that just have to do with our taxes and who's paying and who's not. The fact of the matter is George Bush's tax cuts disproportionately went to the wealthiest 1% of Americans. In fact, nobody benefited more from them than the wealthiest 1/10 of 1% of Americans. Those are the folks who have seen their incomes rise the fastest. And so one of the things that I think we are going to have to do is to reverse some of those Bush tax cuts that went to the wealthiest Americans. And take that money and invest in infrastructure, invest in education, invest in health care for all people. Nobody wants a handout. And America's never going to be perfectly equal because we all have freedom and we want to be able to pursue our own dreams and our own plans, and people who are working harder should be rewarded, and people who are innovators should be rewarded. But what we also want to make sure of is that everybody is paying their fair share. And for those of us who are lucky enough to do well, we should pay a little extra and put a little extra back so that the next generation of Americans are able to take advantage of these opportunities the same way that we were able to take advantage of the opportunities that had been created by a previous generation. So I think that shifting our tax policies, even if we just went back to some of the tax rates for the wealthiest Americans that were under Bill Clinton, it's not as if rich people were suffering under Bill Clinton. I mean, they were doing just fine. And what's interesting is a lot of wealthy people don't mind if you made the case that the money was going to be well spent. You know, I've gotten to know Warren Buffett, who lives in Omaha. The guy still lives in the house he bought in 1967. He is always outraged at the fact that he pays a lower tax rate than some of his employees who are making $45,000 or $50,000 or $70,000 a year, because most of his taxes are in the form of dividends, whereas most of their taxes are in the form of income tax and payroll tax. He says that makes no sense whatsoever. You know, I'm worth billions of dollars. I should be paying a higher rate. And I think that's how most Americans feel. But I'm curious, though, and maybe you want to answer or if somebody else wants to answer. One of the reasons that we don't do this is every election cycle, what happens if you start talking about reversing Bush's tax cuts, for example, everybody says, you see, he's going to raise taxes. And then you get these ads on TV, Obama raising taxes. And then everybody's saying, yeah, he's going to raise my taxes. And you end up not doing so well in the polls. So I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts about what I just said? Or are people, does it make sense, or do people feel like, yeah, go ahead.
When he was running for president the last cycle, he said, be a patriot, pay some taxes.
There you go. Well, you know, I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said that taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. And, you know, I just think that we have lost that sense that as a community, there are things we've got to invest in, just the same way that you got to invest. If you buy a house, you got to make sure every once in a while that you're fixing the roof and keeping the boiler up and cleaning out the gutters. And, right? There are all sorts of things you got to do to make sure that the house stays sound. And you get a sense that we have not been investing. And worse yet, we're running up the credit card. This goes to your point earlier. So not only are we not investing in the things we should be investing in, but we're also spending on things we shouldn't be spending, and we're borrowing from the next generation, which is irresponsible. And that's why when the president starts talking about, I'm just going to keep on lowering your taxes, and I'm going to spend $100 billion a year in Iraq, at some point, something's got to give. And I think that all of us have to have a conversation as a nation about meeting the responsibilities that we have to the next generation.
How can we establish clean elections? Do we have to wait one state at a time, or can we do something across the board nationally so that we establish clean elections so we don't have to worry about this somebody swamping the media with Obama's going to raise your taxes?
Right. Well, a couple of things. It's a great question. What was your name, by the way?
David.
David. we took some good steps this time out on the issue of ethics in Washington. Myself, Russ Feingold, and the Democratic caucus pushed through some of the toughest ethics reforms since Watergate, banning in a more serious way meals and gifts from lobbyists, forcing the disclosure of bundling, which is where lobbyists gather up money from their various clients and present it to legislators as a way of currying favor, eliminating the use of corporate jets that were a major subsidy to candidates. So we made some good progress on that front. But we haven't, I think, dealt with the underlying key problem in elections, and that is the huge amounts of money that are required in order to compete. I'll be honest with you, I have spent a bunch of time this election cycle raising money, because that's the only way that I can run for the presidency. And it's not something that is my favorite thing to do. Now, you know, what's helped is the Internet's actually helped, because it allows a lot of $25 donors and $50 donors. Ordinary people can contribute, and we can raise money from in small increments a lot easier than we used to be able to do it. And so that's actually helped to even the playing field a little bit. But ultimately, I think what we're going to have to do is institute one of two things: either public financing of campaigns, and Dick Durbin and myself and others have introduced a bill. Dick, I know, is at one of the House parties, has crafted a very intelligent approach to public financing of campaigns. You know, you'd have to, not anybody could just access it. You'd have to get a certain number of signatures, collect a certain number of $5 contributions to show that you had significant support, and then you could potentially access this public financing in exchange for a pledge that you'd only spend so much, you wouldn't spend a lot of your own money, and so forth. Alternatively, what we can also do is to institute free TV time, because that's where all the money is going anyway. And if we said to local and national broadcasters and cable station owners that, look, this is part of the deal for you using the broadcast spectrum, or you getting subsidies for some of the infrastructure that you've laid to allow you to access people's homes, is you're going to have to provide a certain amount of free TV time. And again, people could then access it based on them showing that they have a certain amount of support, so that they are serious candidates in the election. Now, can I say this, though? Again, this is why I like to reemphasize the importance of all of you in this process. If you talk in Washington to the pundits and the political consultants, they will say, and they've said this to me, listen, Barack, don't bother with worrying about public financing of campaigns, because even though everybody says that it's something that is important to them, nobody ever votes on it. And in fact, people don't like the idea of welfare for politicians. You know, why should we be financing their campaigns? We got better things to do with our money, our tax money. And so if we're really going to have significant change at the federal level, it's not going to be enough just for me as president to say we need to do this, because what will happen is the other side will say, well, of course, he's the president now, so he doesn't want somebody spending $300 million against him. He can get on TV anytime, which isn't a completely unfair argument. Incumbents always have certain advantages. It's important that the public say we are outraged, we are tired of how campaigns are bought, and we want to change it. And when the public makes this a top priority and they vote based on that priority, that's when you're going to start seeing change happen. Okay? Where'd you come from?
Snuck in.
Snuck in? All right. In the back, yeah, go ahead.
Steve from Elk Point.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I had a question about alternative fuels.
Sure, go ahead.
Are you for eliminating the import tariffs on them to get ethanol
Just to give you a sense of are you a farmer, Steve? No? Okay. We've made enormous progress in terms of domestic ethanol production. Most of our ethanol production is corn-based, and I have a big promoter of ethanol here, not only in Iowa, but in my home state of Illinois. We're the two biggest corn producers in the country, as well as biodiesel and soy diesel. But we are still not as efficient as we could be in our ethanol production. Brazil argues that its ethanol production is much cheaper, and they should be able to ship ethanol into the United States without tariff. The thing is that Brazil also has subsidized its ethanol production pretty significantly over the last 20 to 30 years. And so the concern that I have is making sure that we don't replace one set of imports, oil from the Middle East, with another set of imports, ethanol from Brazil, that weakens ethanol production in the United States just as it's about to take off. So I want to make sure that we are creating a homegrown ethanol industry, and I want to make sure that we've got a distribution system that increases demand overall, so that at a certain point, the amount of ethanol that we're producing in the United States will not be sufficient, and we're going to have to import that ethanol anyway. The biggest problem that we have right now is we don't have a good distribution system for all the ethanol that we're producing. I mean, you know, I've got a flexible fuel vehicle in Chicago that runs on E85 gasoline as well as regular gasoline. Unfortunately, there are a handful of gas stations in Illinois that will actually pump E85. So what I did was I passed legislation last year that would provide a tax incentive to gas station owners to set up an E85 pump. And hopefully that will start spurring more production. There have been some problems. We've gotten some reports that some of the big oil companies have told their franchisees, don't do this, or you might see us maybe put the squeeze on you. And so we've had to write to some of the oil companies saying, you know, that's not acceptable. You've got to make sure that you are not discouraging the kind of alternative fuel infrastructure that's going to be needed. Any follow-up?
What kind of legislation laws would you look at to eliminate these big oil companies from doing that?
Well, our first step was to writing letters to their CEOs saying we're going to be watching what you're doing. And, you know, we can also take a look to see, you know, are there antitrust laws or other consumer laws that are in place that prevent this kind of meddling in the decisions of gas station owners to improve their infrastructure and allow alternative fuels to get to market. Okay. Yes, sir.
We've talked about everything but the war, so let's talk about that for a while.
Let's talk about it.
I think we all agree that we need to get out of Iraq as soon as it is reasonably possible. But we still have another war going on, and that's the one in Afghanistan.
Right.
And I think that has some very important ramifications, and I'd like to know what your plan is to pursue that, or whatever you're going to do.
Well, first of all, I'm proud of the fact that I was against this war from the start. I thought it was a bad idea. I thought it was, for those of you who are interested, on our website, you can actually read the speech I delivered in 2002, 5 months before we actually launched the invasion of Iraq. And my argument at the time was, I don't see evidence of weapons of mass destruction that would cause us imminent threat, that this is going to cost us an undetermined number of lives, cost us an undetermined billions of dollars, and would last an undetermined period of time. And I don't take pleasure in having been right on that, but I think that it is important for those who are evaluating my presidential prospects to know that I think I exercise pretty good judgment in assessing what the ramifications of our decisions there would be. I've argued that we have to be as careful getting out as we were careless getting in. And I think that the bill that I've introduced that now has 54 co-sponsors, including some Republicans and independents, meets that criteria. Because what I say is, starting on May 1st of this year, we need to begin a phased redeployment, get our combat troops out of Iraq, with a goal of having all combat troops out by March 31st of next year. That gives the Iraqi government a year to transition and take seriously what are the essential problems now in Iraq, and those are political problems. Getting the Shia, the Sunni, and the Kurd to come to the political accommodations that are necessary to start reducing the violence. We can't impose a military solution on what has become a sectarian civil war. We can send in an extra 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 troops, and for a brief moment in certain neighborhoods, you'll see a reduction in the violence, although you haven't, as everybody I think has been reading in Baghdad, seen any reduction in the activities of Sunni insurgents. The Shia militias have all pulled back just for a second because they figure they can wait out this surge. As soon as the troops leave, they'll reassert themselves and come back in. That is not a tenable strategy over the long term, particularly when we're losing hundreds of young men and women, and we are spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year. We can't sustain it. Now, we've got to combine that phased redeployment with a regional strategy of regional diplomacy. And I have made an argument that as odious as the Iranian regime is and the Syrian regime is, we've got to have conversations with them the same way that Ronald Reagan had conversations with the evil empire, the communists in the Soviet Union, recognizing that there are weak points in those countries and there's dissent in those countries, and if we are engaging them, then they cannot say to the international community, the problem is Western aggression or American aggression. If we say that we're willing to talk and we're firm and forthright in terms of what we expect from them in terms of behavior, then that flushes them out. It forces them to show their hand. It gives us, I think, more leverage ultimately to be able to, for example, apply economic sanctions on Iran if it doesn't stand down on its nuclear weapons. One last point I'd make in terms of the value of redeploying our troops out of Iraq. Not only do I think it's the best thing for Iraq, but it also allows us to send some of those troops into Afghanistan, a country that has been slipping back into the hands of the Taliban, a country where al-Qaeda has reasserted itself. We should have never left as early as we did. We should have improved on our initial sound efforts in Afghanistan, worked on the reconstruction process, stabilized that country, left our few Arab language interpreters and operatives in Afghanistan and finished the job there, we would be further along in defeating the terrorist networks that should be our primary concern than we are now because we didn't do that.
They are major drug producers, and one of the big problems in this country is the use of drugs. Yeah. And we haven't, not only haven't attacked that, we haven't even reduced it at all. And it goes up enough.
You're exactly right. Actually, I was talking with, he's now retired, but at the time he was the Supreme NATO Commander, General Jim Jones, a wonderful man who just recently retired from military service. But as Supreme Allied Commander for NATO, he was responsible for the operations in Afghanistan in conjunction with the other NATO countries. And he actually said that one of the biggest problems that has not been addressed effectively is the opium trade there, which is financing terrorism, is financing warlords, is rendering the justice system there completely corrupt. And unless we got a handle on that, then we would continue to see huge problems all throughout the region. And so you're exactly right that one of the things that bolstering the NATO forces in Afghanistan would do is to try to have a more systematic mechanism for dealing with narco trafficking. One of the things we're going to have to do to deal with that problem, though, is also give economic opportunity to farmers and those who live in rural communities in Afghanistan. I mean, they may not have tractors and fancy machinery, but farmers in Afghanistan operate like farmers in a lot of parts of the world, which is they grow the crops that are going to give them the best yields and make the most money. And right now, opium is the only cash crop that they have. And so we've got to work with them to create a different economic calculation for them. And that hasn't been done as systematically as it needs to be. Good. Thank you. Yeah. Cool. You never introduced yourself. John, good to see you.
And I'm just very interested in politics. I'm a junkie that comes into politics. But I was interested, as being a senator, you're out here on the campaign running around. Does anybody, does the White House send you any kind of summary of what's going on? Does the Democratic Party send you something that goes on? Or how do you find your information? Do you find it from the news? Or?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. Some of the information I gathered the way you guys gather it. Now, I watch CNN or I read the newspapers and I get a sense of what's going on. I also have access, though, to briefings. So if I want to know about Afghanistan, I can go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing or initiate a hearing in which we bring in our top experts from the State Department or from the Department of Defense and get them to provide us with more specific information about various issues. I have access to experts outside of government. One of the nice things about being a U.S. Senator is you can pretty much call anybody and they'll take your phone call. And they'll give you a couple of minutes, So, if I've got a question on the national debt, I can call up David Walker, who's the head of the government agency that's in charge of monitoring our debt levels and our fiscal situation, and he can give me an honest briefing on what's going on. So I take advantage of that quite a bit as well. But, a lot of the issues that we face in the country today, you can actually get a pretty good idea of what's going on just based on reading the newspapers. The reason I was able to, I didn't have access to special intelligence information when I gave that speech in opposition to the war on Iraq. Most of the information was out there that indicated that maybe the administration was overstating the case. But it wasn't what was amplified on the television, right? And so the one thing that I do think all of us have to do, not just U.S. senators, but citizens generally, is to dig a little deeper. And it's hard because folks, everybody's got jobs and trying to get kids home on time or get kids to school on time or paying the bills. And, and sometimes when you come home, you'd rather watch SportsCenter or whatever the equivalent is. My wife likes Home and Garden Network. So he's got a big applause there. But the information's out there. You just got to want to get it, and you're probably not going to get it just by watching the evening news. You're probably going to have to. Yeah, you'll get snippets, but if you want to dig a little deeper, you've got to read the newspapers. Our newspaper readership has gone down, and I think that is actually not a good thing. The internet provides a lot of useful information, but you've got to be willing to search for it. So,
question regarding
Jody,
that. You're talking about, us digging deeper for information. What do you think about what the government, like right now with the data profiling and the data mining and government surveillance programs? And I'm taking one of Professor Schmidt's classes, out of Iowa State right now, and it just blows you away, the volume of information that is collected. I mean, every time we can go, buy a roll of toilet paper or whatever we're buying. I mean, every time you use your cards and the little, you shop at certain stores, they're collecting all of this information, and it's, I don't know.
What do you think about it?
I think it's a huge invasion of privacy.
Mm-hmm. What do other people think about it? But I'm just curious. The general argument that's made is, look, after 9/11, we've got to take certain precautions, and we trust the government to make good decisions about this. And so, what do people think in the room? Anybody have an opinion? Who was speaking there? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm afraid it isn't just the federal government that gets that information. It's getting into the hands of everyone, and so we have laws like HIPAA and protecting people from getting our Social Security numbers that is meaningless because it's already out there.
Right.
And I think it started maybe with protecting us because of 9/11, but now it's gone way beyond that, and they're using it in other ways.
Right. They say it's wrong.
Well, I happen to agree with you, so I'm glad that's people's general opinion. One of the reasons that I opposed Alberto Gonzalez's nomination as Attorney General, I voted against his confirmation, was I had a sense that he was an Attorney General who saw his job as being the President's lawyer. Well, that's not actually the role of Attorney General. The President has his own lawyer. He's called White House counsel. The Attorney General is supposed to be the people's lawyer and is supposed to tell the President what the laws are on behalf of the people, and is supposed to keep the President in check and let the President know, well, actually, you can't do that. You're supposed to say no to the President. And that's not something that Mr. Gonzalez has shown any inclination to do, which is part of the reason we're getting into some of the problems we have now. Look, all of us believe that after 9/11 that we had to respond intelligently and improve our intelligence capability. And there were parts of the old laws that needed to be changed. I'll give you a particular example. It turned out that before 9/11, if you wanted to wiretap a bad guy or a potential bad guy, you had to go get a warrant. That makes sense. But you could only get a warrant for a land-based phone. Now, since nobody's using land-based phones anymore, you figure that was a part of the law that needed to be changed, and I don't think anybody would object to updating the law to keep up with new technology. It may be that in certain circumstances, data mining by a federal agency like the NSA might make some sense, with one caveat, that there's always somebody who is watching the watcher, somebody who is overseeing the process, who's outside of the process, as a check and balance on the system to make sure that it's not being abused, that all the safeguards are in place, etc. And the biggest problem that we've had on all these issues is that the administration's attitude is we are not subject to any oversight. We're not subject to the FISA court that was set up specifically to oversee whether or not these surveillance techniques were appropriate and were targeting the right people. They weren't willing to subject any of these intelligence programs to the Senate Intelligence Committee, and the Republicans were reluctant to push the administration on that. So what you had was basically 5 years in which the intelligence agencies in the White House were running amok. There was no checks and balances built into the system. And my view is that we should not have any program in which somebody in the executive branch simply says to the American people, trust us, we won't abuse the system. That's just not, I mean, one of the aspects of genius in our Constitution and the Founding Fathers was understanding that, human beings may be good, but they got a little bad in them too. Nobody's an angel, and nobody is invulnerable to potential abuses of power, and that's why they made sure that the president's not all powerful, Congress is not all powerful, the courts are not all powerful, and we've lost that sense when it comes to our national security apparatus, and I think that's one of the things that we've got to restore. I think that whether it's the courts or a Senate oversight committee, that every action taken by the administration has to have somebody outside the executive branch reviewing it to make sure that they're not being abused. Okay, go ahead.
I was wondering.
I'm sorry. Well, let me go here first, and then I'll come back to you.
My name's Jeannie, and I've been in the school system for 18 years. There's many teachers here, retired teachers. My son just started teaching in Omaha, Nebraska. And I'm really wondering how you feel about No Child Left Behind and what your objectives are for education.
I will be happy to tell you my opinion, but I want to hear yours as well. So let me start by, I'll give mine first, just so it doesn't look like I'm, agreeing with you. I think that there were aspects of No Child Left Behind that in theory sounded good. We all believe in high standards and high expectations for our kids. We all want highly qualified teachers in every classroom. We all want extra support for children who aren't doing well. But the way it was implemented, you had No Child Left Behind leaving the money behind. So there was no funding to locals. Well, it's an exaggeration to say no funding. There was insufficient funding to local school districts to carry out some of the federal mandates. That's not the first time it's happened. The same thing happened with special education funding, where the federal government has never stepped up to the plate the way it said it would. But we also had a series of ways of measuring whether schools were doing a good job, and penalizing schools for supposedly failing on the job, that I think didn't take the realities of our school systems into account. So you had test scores that were set and normed nationally, not taking into account that if you've got a school with 80% or 90% free lunch program, low-income kids, that they may start at a different place than children in some fancy suburb somewhere. It doesn't mean that the children, we shouldn't have high expectations that those low-income children can succeed at the same levels as those high-income children. It is to acknowledge that they're starting at a different place, and what we should be measuring is progress and growth over the course of their careers in the school system, as opposed to expecting that each year they're going to be right on par at every step of the way. So the reauthorization for No Child Left Behind is up this year. And what I've said is unless we make some changes in terms of assessments using a growth model as opposed to the way that schools are being penalized right now, that I wouldn't be in favor of reauthorization. I think we've got to have some fundamental changes in the system. But the one thing, I rode over here with a group of teachers. We took a bus, and we had a conversation on the bus, and it was, it was interesting to hear how discouraged I think a lot of teachers feel. I mean, one of the things they disliked about No Child Left Behind is they felt like it just blamed teachers and delivered a message that what they were doing wasn't worthwhile. What it made me realize, and I've said this before publicly, is it's not enough simply to be against No Child Left Behind. That's not an education policy. And we really do have to pick up the pace of our young people's performance if they're going to compete in the international economy. So let me turn it back to you then. What do you, in terms of your experience, the mayor was bragging about the school system here. I'll bet Onawa's schools are probably doing a little bit better than a lot of schools around the country, but what would make a difference in your life? The one thing I know would make a difference, because my sister in Hawaii as a teacher, is more pay, and so I'm a big booster in that. But in terms of making the classroom experience better, giving young teachers more support, what kinds of things do you think would make sense?
I work in the library. I'm an assistant. I'd rather pass it off to some teachers here for what they're interested in, please.
Any teachers who want to offer their opinion in terms of what would make a big difference?
I think if parents were being held accountable sometimes, whether it's getting your children to school, we do a Pizza Hut Book It program where we ask our parents to read 4 books a month, and I've been told by many parents we just don't have time for that. That isn't important. So I think we need to also educate the parents maybe how important it is. And you had touched on a little bit of how we can't help what we get in our classroom, whether they've been born into a house that does meth at night, or if the parents are up all night or no one's home. And the No Child Left Behind does not take that into account with what we're dealing with. And so to expect all of those students to reach the same percentage, it's just not feasible. So those are some of the things I would like to see changed.
Well, a couple of other things that I'm interested in increasing early childhood education, not just pre-K, but also 0 to 3, where if you give both children and their parents support early on, it can pay huge dividends down the road. We learn about 90% of what we ever learn in the first 3 years of life. And investing more money there, I think, makes a difference. I think providing better training and support of young teachers as they come into the system makes a big difference. If they're paired up with a master teacher, they can apprentice for a while so that they feel that they're not just thrown into the deep end of the pool. That can make a difference in terms of both the quality of their teaching, but also their continuity and retention in the system. That can make a big difference. As I said, I think teachers need to be paid more. And I think they need to be given more flexibility in the classroom. Now, I do think that all of us have to be held accountable in the education system. Parents need to be held more accountable. And I've said this publicly. We've got to overcome sort of an anti-intellectualism that has seeped into our kids. They watch too much TV. They play too many video games. We've got to talk about that publicly. Parents have to be held accountable. Students have to be held accountable. And teachers have to be held accountable, but we've got to use tools that make sense and they're developed by people who actually understand education, as opposed to folks who are just looking on from down high without having a good sense of what's actually happening in the classroom. Okay, I've got time for one more question or comment. Please.
It's kind of a comment question, but it's more personal. Do you know enough honest, intelligent people to fill your cabinet when you become president?
That's a pretty good question. I do. And this is actually a good place to end by saying this. You'd be amazed the number of really smart, good people who'd like to serve in government. And would take big cuts in pay to serve in government. the problem is that our politics doesn't reward those people. And so a lot of those people just feel like, I don't want to have to play the game. And that's why it's so important for us to, I think, change our political culture. I mean, you think about what happened in Katrina. FEMA used to be one of the best agencies in the federal government. And the Bush administration came in. They fire or demote or sideline people who've been professionals there for years. You put in Michael Brown, whose main resume was running a racetrack somewhere, right, and had been a lobbyist, had no real professional training in emergency management. So now, people who've been there for 15, 20 years, they say to themselves, why am I going to be working for a guy who doesn't know what he's doing? That tells me that my experience is disrespected. So you start seeing attrition, senior level people leaving. The same thing has happened in the Justice Department. In certain areas like civil rights, for example, since the administration has shown no interest in enforcing civil rights laws, a lot of senior attorneys in the Civil Rights Division just retired. They say, what the heck? I'll go make some money in private practice. So you've seen a lot of discouragement. And one of the things that I want to restore is a sense that government can make a difference in people's lives. It can't solve every problem. I've said this before. Government can't, if Michelle's mad at me, then government's not going to solve that problem. I've got to solve that by behaving myself better and being more considerate towards her. It's not going to solve every problem with the school system because at some point parents have to parent. The school system can't replace parents in every instance. We're going to have to work harder because we've got more global competition. There's no point in griping about it. If Chinese or Indian engineers are working harder and honing their skills, we've got to recognize that the world has changed, and we've got to meet that challenge. But government can make a difference in making sure that every child has opportunity. It can make a difference in making sure that the benefits and burdens of this new dynamic global economy are spread evenly across the board. Government can make a difference in making sure that if you slip and fall, as everybody will at some point in their lives, that there's somebody reaching down to help you get back on your feet. That if you get sick, you're not going to go bankrupt and lose your house. That if you've worked all your life, you're not going to end up destitute in your old age because somebody decided that they were going to get rid of your pension or underfund it. That government can make sure that our children are inheriting an earth that has clean water and clean air and the climate hasn't completely changed. I mean, there are important things that we can do together that we can't do individually. And what I want to do is to restore a sense that this government belongs to us, that it's not something that you're just cursing at the TV set and has nothing to do with your life, that if all of us are participating, that we can restore a sense of competence and a sense of honor to public service. And if we do that, then most of the challenges that we face, I think, can actually be solved. I think we can create a healthcare system that is more rational. We can create an education system that serves our children better. I think we can create an energy policy that is good environmentally and good for our economy and good for our national security. I think we can restore our standing in the world. People have been telling me how discouraged they are that everybody hates America. Let me tell you, the truth is that actually people outside this country still believe in America. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so disappointed. You can't be disappointed with people who you don't have high expectations for. And the reason people are so disappointed is because they know that America is still that last best hope on earth. They don't think the Chinese are going to be promoting liberty around the world. They don't believe that Russia is going to create a more just world for children. They think America could still do it. But they're asking the American people to live up to our best values and our best ideals. And so, that's what hopefully this campaign will be all about. And I hope that all of you have enjoyed this. I want all of you to caucus for me. Those of you who are not in Iowa, I want you to vote for me, unless you're in Nevada, because you also have to caucus for me. And I want you to continue to give us your ideas, your feedback, your energy, your time. If we can keep on building this kind of grassroots effort around the country, then I think not only will I win the election, but more importantly, I think we can transform the country. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.